there's a confidence process. You've got to build confidence. I think many of us feel on the spot. I remember giving my very first lecture and having a shaking leg, and I think rock climbers call it the Elvis leg, you know, when your leg shakes. And a year or two later, I was talking to one of the students who was still studying, and she knew how, and she reminded me of how nervous I was, and they all knew how nervous I was. So that development of confidence, you've got to give yourself a break and realise that will come with time. The key thing, though, I think about developing and progressing is to realise that if you are falling into practices, nobody really requires you to perpetuate anything. You know, you are licensed to invent things, and you are licensed to start again and do something differently. I think one of the difficult things is getting your content straight, actually having the lectures, clarifying it in your own mind so you've got the material that you can work with. I think that's important, but I also think you shouldn't then become a slave to the content and continue to deliver it the same way that you always have. I think it's probably valuable to think about a couple of years, if you're teaching a course, if you're fortunate enough to teach a course in a number of iterations, you can spend some time getting your content right and then start to think about how you might teach it better. You know, give yourself room for an improvement curve, I guess. I think a real insight came for me with, and something that I hope you can pass on to people in an advice sense, is that learning is such a social experience, is that students are there in a classroom as a group, and you think they're all concentrating on you, but in fact they're all concentrating psychologically on each other. They're much more aware of each other than they are of necessarily what's coming from you. And I only understood this when my half-brother enrolled in one of my courses last year, and he was explaining to me about why I couldn't get any volunteers in the first lecture, and he said, well, that's because no one wants to volunteer when they're hyper self-conscious about what the person beside them thinks, you know, and they're all checking each other out. It's not just the performance of the lecturer in the front of the room, it's very much a social environment. So I think my advice would be, in more practical terms, would be aware that this is a social environment, that the students are, if they're aged first or second year university students, they're 17, 18, 19 years old in the Australian case, they're hyper-conscious of how they appear in the eyes of their peers, and you've got to allow for that and accommodate that.